All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Excess Succeed. This is Gearface. I'm joined today by Andarel. Andarel, thank you so much for being here.
Yep, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Today, we are talking about one of, I think, the most infamous characters in the history of Exceed. It's Alice. We're going to learn a whole lot about how this character works, maybe why you've never played against her in tournament before. That'll probably come up at some point. Um, Couple disclaimers before we get started. As always, number one, we're going to be talking about playing to win on this show. That's a little bit going to be different than it normally is this time, as I just alluded to. Alice is one of a couple of characters, one of four characters in Exceed who's been banned from competition. So, please Alice responsibly. The stuff that we're going to be describing is how you win with Alice, but maybe make sure that your friend that you're playing with knows what they're getting into before you sick her on them. Um, uh, Exceed is a fun game. You can play it for fun. That's not the only playing to win is not the only way to play. I encourage you to play in the way that you find fun. Even with Alice, just be a little careful with her. Um, Disclaimer number two: we are going to be pretty prescriptive about strategy on this show. You're going to hear Andarel saying things like "always do this, never do this." That's take that with a grain of salt. Exceed's not a solved game. That said, this is an old character. This is from back in season one. People have figured out this game. There's pretty entrenched lines of play for a lot of these characters. That said, if we did miss something or if we underrepresented something, please let us know. We would love to hear from you. Yeah, all that said though, Anderel, tell me a little bit about Alice.
So Alice is a ranger. She's kind of a 2 to 3 ish range character.
Okay.
She's actually a really interesting character because the sort of very specific ranges character hasn't been done that often in Exceed. More recently you've got like Gold Lewis, you have some Propeller Knight folks. It's not that common to have characters where a lot of their ranges are like just a number.
Right.
And I
Like
think
really,
that
really, really specific.
Yeah, Ulrich kind of has that, but he moves for free.
Right.
And Propeller Knight is Alice and Ulrich stable together, so he has a similar thing, and also more gentle ranges regardless. So I think conceptually she was designed as like, it's kind of awkward for you to hit. So your attacks need to be really good, and they kind of missed the mark. Her attacks are, in fact, and her boosts are, in fact, kind of bonkers.
Yeah.
So yeah, Alice is banned. She was the first character banned. To give a little bit of backstory, the very first Exceed tournament that happened, as far as I know, after the game released, was at Gen Con. I forget what year it was, maybe 2018,
So
something like that.
2017, 2018 sounds right. This was well before my time, but I've
Might have been
seen
17, yeah.
posts. Yeah, somewhere in there.
And so what happened was there was a lot of people trying to figure out the game. It wasn't that big; it was maybe an eight person tournament.
Yeah.
And people realized really quickly that Marathi was really good, and also Marathi was really easy to play.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people took Marathi, and then there was a mix of characters afterwards. But a couple of us, myself, Charles, who is a name that you may have heard actually, but is not very well known as an Exceed player. He is one of the best BattleCon players out there and won a lot of Gen Con tournaments.
Okay.
So he was dabbling in Exceed at the time, also picked Alice. And we realized pretty quickly a couple of things, which I'll talk about, but notably that the game's engine, the fact that in BattleCon you move for free, or rather, there's infinite speed abilities, and in Exceed there aren't, means that just going fast is really nice, and Alice sure is fast.
Right.
So yeah, so Alice is banned. To sort of reiterate, there's a couple of reasons, and we'll talk about that when we get to her cards, and many of them have something a little bit ban-worthy about it. But overall, she exists in what the community now kind of calls the boss character range, where they're characters that are, like one or two cuts above. I think she is not an ultra boss or super boss or whatever they call them. Go and check out the customs community if you want to see some really silly character designs.
Right.
But she is probably advantaged against basically any character. There's a couple that can do fine into her, and a couple that do. I don't know if anyone does well into Alice. I mean, Juno does, but she's kind of
She's also
also a boss
banned.
character.
Right.
Carmine goes comparably, and he's also banned in a lot of circles.
Right.
So yeah. With that said, so the first thing you have to know about Alice is that all right, you see these two cards right here?
Sure do.
Dark Corruption, Surprise Punishment. Other than these two cards, all of the numbers on her cards are basically lies
Okay.
because her character ability says that if the opponent is at your max range, you get +2 power.
Okay. As
And
long as it's 3 or more. So all
yeah, as
of
long as it's 3 or
these
more.
have ranges
So
of 3 or more.
yeah, so this only hits a 3, so this is really a 15. This hits at 1 to 4, but you retreat beforehand, so it's probably a 5.
Right.
This has very flexible movement on hit, so it's probably a 3.
Right.
This has, a range 3 again, so it's probably a 7, might be a 9. And this is actually, might be a 1, but if you hit it at range 2 specifically, it's probably a 3.
Okay.
So this ability, it also works on Spike and on Sweep, which is, nice. I mean, a Power 7 Spike is not actually that different from a Power uh, 5 Spike. Like, it ignores armor and guard, so it's not going to crush defenses any better. It
Right.
gives you more
Right.
reward. And a Power 6 Sweep Power 6 Sweep is definitely worse than a Power 8 Sweep. That beats Sweep and Focus. But it's Alice. If she's throwing an attack at range 3, you already might die if you play slow. So just be careful.
Sure. Okay.
It's not. It's more value. It's nice.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry
go
to
ahead.
interrupt you, Andarel. You said some numbers while we were talking here that don't come up very often in Exceed. I heard a 9 and a 15. And like, a lot of people who are playing this or who are watching this guide are not going to be super familiar with the intricacies of what season 1 tends to do. But like, a lot of season 1 characters have an ultra that hits for double digit and sometimes like mid to high double digit damage, right? So when I look at a 13, 15 damage ultra, my monocle pops out. Like, that's insane to me. But kind of the environment that she was played in, you mentioned Marathi. Marathi's got Shadow of Death. That's a 8 speed 15 damage ultra. So like, the the damage numbers that we're talking about might seem unbelievable to modern players, and maybe they are unbelievable because of various things that do make Alice banworthy. But like, having a 15 damage card is actually not that like insane for a Red Horizon character. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I mean it's Crossblades is a pretty decent card. We'll get into why it's good later, but it's not good because of Crossblades. Like, it's good because of the synergies in her kit. Hitting for 15 is definitely going to win you the game if you land it.
Right.
But it is 1 speed. It does if they move or if they somehow hit you or whatever. It's not going to work. But it is sort of the cash out ultra. She does have a on curve 9 damage ultra as her other one, which is possibly a little scarier in
Yeah,
Modern Exceed design.
that's still messed up.
Yeah, that's not super common either. But you playing her ultras is the choice. She has other ways to spend gauge that are probably better. So
Okay.
yeah, Alice is silly. And yes, her ultras. She does reasonably often hit for 9 or 15 without boosts up. So just take that as you will.
So just
She is.
remember that we're talking about numbers that you don't commonly see in Exceed anymore. And also, when you were talking about like this character was banned pretty early on, um she has continued to be banned. So like, the stuff that we're talking about is not a relic of a meta of Exceed that is no longer relevant. She'll still mess up characters, right? Like, she's still probably too powerful.
Yeah, and actually, a lot of custom designers will play into Alice to confirm their character is, not too strong, because if you beat Alice, you are automatically too strong and need to be significantly nerfed.
Okay,
She
I
is,
gotcha.
well established as the bar where, like, characters probably shouldn't even come close to this.
Okay.
She has weaknesses, but they are very specific, and her strengths are so overpowering that, she do what she do.
Okay, cool. So I'm already kind of gathering that I want to be at range 3 with this character. Do we want to
Yep.
talk about like overall game plan? Do we want to talk about just the kit itself? What's our
So yeah,
plan here?
so Alice is kind of unusual in that a lot of characters kind of have a character concept that's like you try and enforce a certain mix up, or you try and get into a boost situation, or you try and use an ability.
Mhm.
That is not how Alice works. Alice has cards that are at specific ranges, and if you're at those ranges, she plays them and just demolishes you. Right? That
Okay.
is her cards are individually very strong. Her boosts are so-so. Um, except for like as in terms of stats, her generally if one of her boosts has stats on it, it is bad. If it does not have stats on it, it is incredible.
Okay.
Um, and so basically, yeah, you need to if the opponent lets you be at range 3 at the start of your turn, they probably eat a quarter of their life or more. So that's kind of your game plan.
Okay.
You have normals, right? So you can kind of play around that. Your big weakness is your economy. You have very very little card draw across the board, and that's kind of the angle people can attack you on, especially if they have above card options because you are pretty speed dependent. But when I say speed dependent, I mean this is a character who is consistently on to above curve and has problems with like +2 speed. +1, that's okay.
Right. I mean, more than half of her kit is above curve. Just like looking at it and doing the math real quick. One of them is speed 8, but like she has a on curve card, and that's slow for her. It seems like.
Yeah, so she's got so Guardian Slasher, Sword and Cross, Soul Gazer, and Bloody Baptism are all above, like a little bit above, except for Soul Gazer, which is way above.
Right.
The Dark Corruption and Surprise Punishment are on curve, and also like you might play Dark Corruption. The boost is absurd, but like it's a on curve 4 damage ignore armor. That seems fine.
Right.
What are they
Sure.
what are they gonna do about that? Sweep you? Like you beat sweep in a bunch of other ways.
Right.
And then you have Crossblades, which is not, both way under curve, but also an auto dodge.
Yeah.
And speaking of auto dodges, let's talk about one of the best Exceed abilities in the game. So in season 1, the sort of general paradigm, with very very few exceptions, was your character does a thing, right? If you're Heidi, you boost. If you're Reese, you stun people to gain advantage. If you're, I don't know, Wrathy, you discard cards, or you discard people's cards and you wild swing a lot.
Right.
Um, your Exceeds did one of like 2 to 3 things. They very often gave you +2 power for doing the thing you wanted to do.
Mhm.
This was common. This was really good. Usually, free +2 power is a lot, so you try to exceed those ASAP. Or they made your ability cheaper. A really notable one there was like Miska, who had the dog, where if normally it would cost you some force to strike from the dog, but you don't if you
Right.
exceed.
Right.
Alice is one of the couple weirdos whose exceed is just totally unrelated, and her exceed it gives you another passive, which is passively, if you're at your max range and it's 3 or more, attacks don't hit you.
That's messed up.
And yeah, I mean, we've seen in a lot of Exceed generations just how good auto dodges are, and
Hmm.
having an auto dodge on 5 out of 7 character cards and 2 out of 8 normals is kind of silly, to put it lightly. It doesn't The normals that it buffs don't like change interactions inherently. Like, sweep still, it doesn't lose to spike anymore at range 3, but like the other interactions are pretty much the same. But that's still, it means that you basically can't ever fight her at range 3 because you can't out boost her. If you go faster, you just miss.
Right.
Throwing more power into an auto dodge is basically never going to work. And what are you going to do? Like guard? If you're throwing guard into an auto dodge, it doesn't work either.
So
So
so of the sort of classic range 3 exceed mix up of uh spike, assault, dive, sweep, right?
yeah,
Just this on its own shuts off 2 of those at range 3 because you can still assault in. Now you're at range 1. You are no longer at, assuming you can get under her really really
right.
fast cards. Like, but just this ability on its own, you can move in, you can move out, and not have to deal with that. But among the normals, you can't sweep her at range 3. You can't spike her at range 3. But assaults and dives would still work effectively as normal, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem, right? So that encourages you to basically play those on curve or slightly under curve fast cards with no defense, and that's what she
And
destroys.
then she'll eat you alive with her faster, better cards.
Yeah.
Okay.
So exceed ASAP because the a lot of the time many opponent characters just can't play the game into this as
Yeah.
long as you have enough cards to throw at it. It also leads to some silliness where if the opponent is trying a setup of some sort and you move to range 3, doesn't really matter what it is, right? Unless it moves them, it's not going to do anything. They just can't hit.
Right. So
And
if they have light down, if they have Way of the Warrior down, it's not helping for what
yeah,
most of what they're trying to land.
unless they're throwing specifically assault or dive with those. And at range 3, or really at any range, but especially at range 3, Soul Gazer outspeeds both of those,
Right.
even with Way of the Warrior.
Yeah. That's ridiculous. Okay. So just that text alone is already kind of eyebrow raising. Like attacks do not hit you is not something that you see very often in Exceed
Yeah,
outside of
I don't.
specific cards.
I think this is the only character ability that's ever had that. To my knowledge, I know Zolt's text like kind of reads that. It's not like that different because you can chain an attack that's evasive, right?
Right.
Chip has like his after movement, but just straight up attacks that don't hit you is extremely rare.
Right.
So yeah, her Exceed is insane. Do it ASAP. It doesn't really matter if you go down to 0 gauge because she doesn't spend gauge except for in large chunks anyways.
Okay.
She doesn't have cancels. She doesn't have criticals. She doesn't have cheap ultras. If you have 3 gauge, just Exceed. What are they gonna do?
How difficult is it for her to actually gain that gauge in the first place? I'm not seeing any gauge generation cards, but I am seeing a lot of very, very consistent ways to hit the opponent.
Yeah. So the answer to that is it kind of depends on what you draw, but you've got a bunch of cards that are fast and gain advantage and probably hit. So the only time you wouldn't Exceed ASAP is if you're just gonna kill, right? That which is fine. But if you play your normal, like if you play your character specials, basically like Soul
Right.
Gazers and Sorting Crosses, those are gonna hit.
Right.
I mean, there's not a lot of things that outspeed Soul Gazer or evade Soul Gazer without being like a specific auto dodge.
Right.
Same with Sorting Cross. Like Sorting Cross is like one of her best cards because it's just so flexible and it's gonna hit almost certainly.
So you might trade down as Alice when you're confirming these hits, but you're going to get your gauge. You're going to as long as you're playing these cards, you're going to be all right with that. So that means then that this Alice is not. I'm probably not going to be spending very much of the game unexceeded. Like if I'm rushing my exceed mode, I can block twice and then hit with Soul Gazer or something. Like it's not that hard to build 3 gauge.
Yeah, I mean
So
you've got options. You don't need to exceed to win. Your cards are absurd, so that's
right,
fine.
right,
Just the reason that you exceed, and this is sort of a card game and board game theory. There's a difference between like winning and not losing, right? Like some things will push you further ahead, some things will sort of cement your game plan,
sure,
and some things just make it really hard for people to do stuff.
right.
Her Exceed is a really, really, really powerful option denial tool for the opponent, and it's not that expensive.
Right. So
So
if you don't need it, you don't necessarily have to go for it. But the reason I'm asking is like we should when we get into the kit itself, we could say for like 60 to 70% of the game, many of these cards have at their max range your opponent's attacks do not hit you sort of printed on it because I will often have
yeah,
my exceed
yep,
ability because I'll be playing
that
with it a lot.
that's a fair assessment.
Okay.
And we'll talk a little bit about her cards. And yeah, you'll notice that the dynamics of some of these cards change a lot when you're exceeded.
Okay. Sounds good.
So, all right. Speaking of cards,
Yeah.
let's talk about which card makes sense to talk about first. Let's talk about Soul Gazer.
Okay.
So Soul Gazer is a very straightforward card. You hit, move one, gain advantage, and you're super fast. And you probably hit for 1. If you're at range exactly 2, right? You move back 1 and hit for 3. Otherwise, you only hit for 1 because it's a hit. So okay, her ability is passive. It is not a hit effect, which
Okay.
means that it only actually matters after hit effects and like while damage is being dealt. So you can't do the thing where you're at range 3, you resolve her ability, and then you do the hit move.
Oh, okay.
So many modern Exceed designs have made that into a hit effect just to
right.
clean up that passive issue. Hers
Right.
is not.
Okay, so this move 1 space on Soul Gazer, which is not optional, says
Yeah,
that if I'm playing it at range 3, I am not getting the bonus power because this is a passive effect.
correct. It only
Okay.
matters at range 2.
Okay.
You
But at range 3, this is just a way to nope out of a strike instead, right?
Yeah, I mean, what are they going to do? Hit you at range 4? That seems fine. You if they covered range 2 through 4, which does happen sometimes. You have cards like a Yuzu's Special Spike, or there's a bunch of 2 to 4 projectiles with more than one guard.
Right.
It is possible to beat Soul Gazer. Soul Gazer is not really a card that crushes enemy counterattacks per se. It's a very good fast poke. It gains advantage. It's part of some silly kill confirm chains, but it's not like a be all end all.
Okay.
With that said, in Exceed mode, because it now auto dodges at 3, Soul Gazer at 2 is incredibly hard to deal with because you now need a fast card that hit confirms by advancing. Like it hit confirms by moving you in.
Right. Yeah. So something that would and something that you couldn't. So I'm thinking about like a Tatsu or something, right? That at least could guard through the damage that you're doing. But this movement effect is you can option select this. So instead, you play this at 2. Your opponent does something like a Tatsu. You just move to range 1 and they whiff.
Yeah, if it's some Tatsus will still hit at 2, and at that point, so if it's a Tatsu that like advances 2 and has 1 to 2 range, then they'll go. Let me.
Yeah, here I got a training dummy.
Yeah, so if you're here, you Soul Gazer, their Tatsu, they do that, then they Tatsu here, they still hit
They'll
you
still hit
because
you, sure.
it's your max range, so you have to be at 3.
Right.
But it will cover some of those Tatsus, like Spinning Bird Kick, right? The ones that have a hole at range 1.
Right.
Or Polar Knight's Shovel Drop. The ability to probably dodge everything at 3, but also maybe dodge things at 1, seems decent.
Yeah,
So
that's more things that you're dodging than not dodging when you play this in Exceed mode.
yeah, you basically need a card that's like Joffrey's Rush Up counterattack, or think like Stroke the Big Tree, maybe those cards that just like run up and hit with a little bit of guard on them.
Right.
But those are not that common.
Right.
And you do also have 3 power attached, most likely, which is, it's not enough to stun those specific types of cards, which tend to have a kind of be made to counter grasp, so they'll usually have 3 guard on them.
Right.
But it's not bad.
So
and the advantage is certainly nice.
With it being so ridiculously above curve, you can easily use this on defense to nope out of a strike at longer ranges. But the advantage chain element of it means that you are going to poke with this on offense pretty frequently.
Yeah. So it's Sword and Cross is better for poking for a lot of reasons. But Soul Gazer Sword and Cross is better on defense. Soul Gazer is better on offense. They're both very similar cards. Soul Gazer is like comedic on defense. It's very, very hard to just like cover Soul Gazer.
Right.
You need to commit extremely hard to beating it, and if you guess wrong, then she has now moved, and you have to deal with her new range. If it's specifically at 3, it might be okay because she'll Soul Gazer back to 4, and then she actually doesn't like range 4 that much. She has like one option there.
Right.
Or she'll move to 2, and then you still hit. She's better at 2, but 2 is less evasive. So the worst case is getting hit with it at range 2, because then she moves to 3, auto dodges, and then kills you.
Right.
But once you're at 3, it gets a little less scary.
Okay.
Which is a weird dynamic, but just a thing to think about.
Sure. All right. And she's going to be hovering around those 2 ranges anyway.
Yeah, ideally.
Okay. That makes sense.
So, yeah, crazy card. Not as high reward as some other cards, but very good.
Right.
So bullet time, attacks at range 3 and 4 don't hit you. I mean, you've seen this in other seasons and other characters. It's less good on her for a couple of reasons. It has a force cost, which she doesn't love. Her economy is kind of fragile. She has basically no card draw anywhere.
Right.
And so she also doesn't really care. Attacks at range 3 don't hit you. Is profoundly redundant. I'm not spending cards, one of which is like one of the best range 2 to 3 pokes in the game, to do a thing that my ability already does.
Right. And like you can't dodge twice. Like it's not like compounding power bonuses or something. It's like you can't EX and EX. It's that kind of redundancy. It literally doesn't do anything.
The other thing is, if the opponent is really banking on attacks at range 4 don't hit you, and you're exceeded, then you already have a range 4 dodge, because this dodges at range 4 instead of 3.
True, yeah.
And then it hits them for 5, and there's not much they can do about that. It's also above curve for some reason.
Right.
So, that's... This boost is very situational. Just probably just play Soul Gazer.
Just
Soul
play the
Gazer
attack.
is
It's doing everything you want it to do anyway.
yeah. Let's skip Guardian Slasher. We'll get back to that one. Let's talk about Sword and Cross. So Sword and Cross is very similar to Soul Gazer. You can see it's got pretty similar text. It's got strictly worse stats actually, less range and less speed, but the text is way more powerful. So instead of just you moving one, it's you move one or two, then they move one, then you move them one or two, then you get advantage. So most commonly, you're going to see Sword and Cross kind of you strike with it at 3, and then you just kind of wiggle one space towards the corner or two spaces towards the corner.
Right, and maintain range 3 so you get your power bonus. Maybe you also get your exceed mode bonus if you're exceeded.
Yeah. You might also make a larger range. For example, if they have like a closed tool like a Tatsu,
Right.
if you do this, now they Tatsu back to range 3, that's also fine.
Right. So all those things that I was asking about like edge cases where Soul Gazer might not necessarily dodge. Sword and Cross can dodge every card that I named pretty much.
Yeah, basically.
Okay,
It's
that's really scary.
if you're exceeded and they are able to be moved, there are very few situations where you cannot auto dodge them with Sword and Cross.
Right. I mean, even without like flexible movement is a kind of a rarity in Exceed anyway. Even without the move the opponent one or two spaces, just being able to say like this, and this are all within range because it's advance and retreat. That's already ridiculous positioning for speed 6. You use this to dodge. You use this to dodge a projectile from super far away, but then
Yeah, I mean
also,
it
oh,
is okay.
it's a
So
hit effect.
note
It's
it
a
is
hit
on
effect.
hit, so it's not going to
Okay.
auto dodge projectiles
Okay, I
the
get you.
same
I
way.
get you.
But yeah, if you hit with this, you basically set positioning wherever you want, which
Okay.
is excellent and gain advantage, and probably deal 3 damage. So yeah, I mean, everything that we talked about with Soul Gazer is true of Sword and Cross. Also, it is a little less good on defense because of that lacking speed, but it's it's still
Lacking speed.
yeah, just being above
Above
curve
curve
instead of
3.
being way above curve
Yeah. Okay.
is it's a concern. This also does, and this is going to sound really stupid, but this does lose to EX cross a lot of the time.
Okay.
In that they get to cross out and you whiff, or you get hit if you did it at range 2 because you felt safe doing it.
Right.
And this card tends to be like one of your best engine like combo chain continuers, so losing to EX cross is actually kind of annoying. But if that's if that's your first world problem here is losing specifically to EX
To
cross,
EX
then
cross,
you're doing fine in life.
notable card, that everyone has multiple copies of ready on deck. EX cross.
Yeah, it can lose to like also eyes and other above curve pokes or shoryukens,
Right.
but you beat most shoryus you can beat by just playing at range 3. Shoryus tend to not hit at range 3,
Right.
and eyes, those don't get printed that often. So, and
Sure.
Soul Gazer also beats eyes.
And also, I mean, if what you're worried about is EX cross, you do have something. Although, I guess, I mean, realistically, this can't do. But I mean, it could do enough to stun EX cross because you have your bonus power. So, like
Yeah.
them playing EX cross at range 2 into you when you're initiating, just this mix up alone is already pretty scary.
Oh yeah, no, they're taking a risk, but they do have some reward option here if they do call out Sword and Cross.
Okay.
So Grim Determination, would be again a really good boost on a different character. Stun immunity and +3 armor is a pretty good stat line, but I mean, what are you going to make stun immune? You're already above curve on everything, or at least on curve.
Right. Yeah.
You
I
don't.
really need to hit with a mid speed that I have in my kit.
Yeah,
Like,
you've never seen a mid speed, and also your mid speeds are already kind of like your problem with your mid speeds is your hit confirm.
right.
So devoting 3 cards to this, I mean, you could maybe play this if they do like a swift destruction or something, but also you have better boosts to deal with swift destruction.
Right.
So
This is also really expensive.
just for clear, swift destruction is a boost that shows up occasionally, which is just like +4 speed. Just
Yeah.
go extremely fast.
It's old.
So it's a nice. It's on Equus and
It's
Sagat.
on one of his ultras, right? Yeah. Here you go. This
Yep.
guy. Yeah. So like
Yeah.
you see just like overwhelming stat boost that you can't deal with, even bigger numbers than our sort of classic Way of the Warrior benchmark. Maybe then you need to be stun immune, but most of the time Sword and Cross is gonna do you just fine.
And it's worth noting that like this usually the scariest Swift Destruction is Swift Destruction Spike, and Soul Gazer still beats that.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? That's
So
that's messed up, Andarel.
yeah, so be aware that this card exists. Again, these two cards you're mostly playing for the attack. The
Okay.
boosts are highly situational.
Okay.
So uh, again, we're gonna just delay these two because these cards are important and we kind of need
Important.
to set the tone. Bloody Baptism. This card is fine, I guess. You play it. It's 1 to 4 5 5 is a pretty good projectile, to be honest. That's not a card. It's not a number that anyone would complain about.
Yeah, that's I mean pushing it up a little bit more into slightly more modern Exceed design, like isn't that the stat line on like Dan's critical uh fireball?
Is that 1 to 4 or 1 to 3? I think it's one
I,
to
th-
four.
I think it's 1 to 4. And that one doesn't have retreat. This is already like maybe not by the standards of Alice's kit, but that's already still quite strong.
Yeah, so the retreat is a mixed blessing. It's good because it lets you be evasive. It's good because it lets you make range 3. The problem is that retreating to 3 makes you lose 2 power, and then getting from 4 to 3 is kind of annoying for her because her mobility is so bad
Okay.
that if that this might actually be a 1 to 4 3 5 that moves you to 3. But either way, those are both useful. The fact that it can dodge counterattacks, can hit kind of like I would say like a truck, but we both know that's not true. We've seen her other numbers. You can hit at a reasonable damage at
Yeah.
a pretty good speed above
It
curve,
it hits like a
and
it hits
probably evade all counterattacks.
it hits like a Prius.
Yeah, like a small
Yeah,
eco-friendly truck.
like a decent like a sedan, right? Okay. So it's a poke. It's it sounds already like just from the tone of it, it is way less important to her game plan than either of these two are.
It's situational. It's certainly not a problem to play, but if you don't need to play it, don't play it.
Okay.
It's just fine. You're never going to be sad about it if it hits for 5. If you hit for 3 and make range 3, especially if you don't get counterattacked, that's also fine. Having a range 4 auto dodge is occasionally very nice. The fact that it hits for 5 is a treat. All those fun things.
Sure, sure.
Uh, Entertainingly, if the opponent happens to have a fast poke that moves them, which is not unheard of, like a range 4, like fast projectile that advances or something.
Sure.
This card, specifically if it advances on after, this card really is weird about those because they can like dodge on 4 and then before retreat and then hit after they moved, which will occasionally lead to some weirdness.
Dodge on 4, then
Right, it'll
retreat and hit after they've moved. Okay, so
so because it can
you're
dodge a
you're
range, it can
you're
dodge a
all
range 4.
you're already at range 4. I've put my card down. I whiff. Then they move in, and
Yeah,
then
and
you're
then you
like
can choose
sick,
to
and then
retreat.
and then I back up and hit them for 5 anyway.
Yeah, this
Okay.
is again not that common. You might see it with Ryu actually because like it'll beat Metsu Hadoken
Right.
for that reason. It makes it really hard for people to throw those big cash outs at range 4, which is
Okay.
unusual.
Okay.
It does it does also outspeed Metsu Hadoken on offense, I think, but
Yep, it does.
it might lose to Hadoken if the auto dodge is not there, but it'll beat Hadoken if the auto dodge is up. All those fun Alice things.
Right.
So yeah, it's a good card in a vacuum. It's probably even a great card on a lot of characters. It's fine.
By
Play it,
by the
appreciate it.
by the standards of Alice's kit, this is not impressive.
This is either her second worst card or her worst card, depending on how you look at things.
Okay.
You're talking about clearing a high bar.
Yeah, sure. Now,
Uh,
is it unimpressive to the point that I am thinking about if I do need to spend force? This is probably one of the cards I'm looking at.
so if you need to spend force, there's 2 reasons. One of them is because you're moving. One of them is because you're changing cards.
Yeah.
If you're moving, then that's already kind of doing what this card is meant for. Like this is to patch the hole at range 4. So
Right.
if you're trying to move to range 3, like that's fine. You might want to keep it just to like keep that range 4 threat, so it's a little hard for the opponent to play around your movement. But maybe. And also, if change cards, yeah, it's fine. You might play the boost also, but the boost gets you a card in the process.
Right.
But yeah, this is one of the more likely cards to spend as force. This, some normals, your ultras potentially.
Okay.
So yeah, you've got Hunter's Instinct. This card is a lot weirder than it looks, actually. So plus 2 to 1 range is normally really good.
Yes.
Right? It gives you basically +1 speed. It makes your cards more flexible. The interesting thing about plus 2 to 1 range is her counter ability makes this really weird
Right.
because
It'll turn off some
now
of the auto dodges, right?
it turns your 2s into 3s and your 3s into 4s,
Right.
essentially.
Right.
So Soul Gazer now gets the bonus at range 4, which means you want to hit with it at range 3, which is nice, but the plus 1 range doesn't really help there.
Right.
Sword and Cross now gets the bonus at 4, which is great, but you have advantage and you're at a bad range now. Right, because you want to gain advantage at range 3, not 4,
Right.
because you want to be able to follow up on the advantage.
Right. And you want to actually be able to dodge your opponent's attack.
Yeah. Dark Corruption becomes like pure comedy. It's now a 3/6/6 ignore armor at 3.
Yep, that's an ultra. That's
That's
a
not, yeah.
that's a really strong ultra.
Guardian Slasher now does Guardian Slasher things at range 4. It's fine. We'll get to Guardian Slasher. Surprise Punishment bumps up to 11 power at range 3 and is now even more above curve, or is now above curve instead of on curve. That's reasonable, but you already destroy people at 3, so the Hunter's Instinct is not so much winning you more, but it's more the fact that now they have to respect that either by moving in or out.
Right.
And then Crossblades, it's speed 1. Like, it gets better if you're already exceeded because now you dodge at range 3 and 4.
And 4, sure.
But
but you don't want to whiff.
honestly, who
either.
cares?
Yeah. Okay, so
Like, you're not playing Crossblades like just because you're playing
Right.
it because you're setting it up, or you know what the opponent's going to play or something.
Right, it's a cash out. So I have at my disposal enough ways to make use of this. It doesn't sound like it's useless by any means, but it also is going to mess with quite a few of the things that I might otherwise be trying to do at my preferred ranges.
Yeah, it is better on normals. Like, for example, plus 1 range grasp is always good. It's now above curve. Plus 1 range cross is now 5 power, but
Yep.
you do get sent to like a really far away zone unless you're in the corner.
Where you probably don't want to be, right?
Plus 1 range dive is like, it's nice. It's not bad. Plus 1 range assault is actually pretty good. It gets you from 4 to 2, which is pretty respectable.
Which
and
you're cool
it's
with.
got it does have a natural mix up with Bloody Baptism, so that's a little annoying because you spent one of them.
Right.
But also, if they're plus 1 ranging your assault, the mix up is Guardian Slasher, and this card is terrifying. So if they guess wrong, they just instantly die. So they might just leave.
explode.
They might just not want to be at range 4 anymore.
They might just nope out. So it could just be a button a boost that forces your opponent to move.
Yeah. So for example, if you're like here, it might make sense because they're extremely strongly incentivized to get to range 1 immediately.
Right.
But you are giving them a turn to move to range 1.
Right. Sure. And I mean, drawing a card on Alice sounds pretty good from what you're telling me. But
yeah, I mean,
would you say that most of the time when you're playing this, is it too, how do I put this? You have to be at a range where this would be beneficial. But if you are at a range where you can play an attack, you probably just want to be attacking because you're giving your opponent time to move when you boost.
I think realistically, I only boost this card if I'm at range 5 and they can't really deal with plus 1 range dive, even if we're going to trade.
Okay.
Because if I'm at range 4, I probably just play Bloody Baptism. Like, what are they going to do?
Right. And
if I'm at range 3, I have better plays.
And even if you are trying to enable like a Dark Corruption or something that gets much better from range 2 to range 3, you're giving them a chance to do something.
Yeah, which is what you don't really want.
Right.
So
and they're not they're not going to move to range 3. They're going to move to range 1.
They'll move to 1 probably.
Right.
Your range 1 is actually not great.
Okay.
So yeah, so she has like this card looks a lot better than it is, even though it is in fact pretty good. It's just it doesn't really fit in with her game plan. It's kind of more of a backup plan.
Okay.
The main thing is that it does chunk for 5 with very little ways for the opponent to deal with it a lot of the time, and it's hard to say bad things about that, right?
Sure. Yeah.
It is also a viable play at range 1 if they're trying to mid speed you. It will beat focus. It'll trade with spike if they decide to spike you. It'll lose to like cross and grasp, but especially if you initiate, it'll beat assault. It'll like trade with sweep, which is not the end of the world. So it's not like great, but retreating 2 is retreating 2. You
Right.
do what you got to do.
Right. And you want to end up in that mid range anyway, so that'll get you there.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it is risky, but take that with a grain of salt.
Sure, sure. And I mean,
So
and if you were trying to gain advantage at range 2 or range 3, defending with a mid speed in order to beat something, and now it's your turn coming in anyway. Well, you've just gained advantage, but different, right?
yeah. Also, it is worth noting that a lot of the time people will kind of cover things like grasp and cross in the close range game because the opponent can't really react to that. You
Sure.
do have Soul Gazer.
Right.
Just like even at range 1, it's faster than grasp. Playing grasp into her is never actually a guaranteed.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, again, like this card is good. This sort of summarizes her really well because it's super scary, but it's also kind of awkward.
Yep.
So, whoops, didn't need to do that.
It's all good.
Yep. We can again actually skip Dark Corruption Guardian Slasher and go to her
Wow.
ultras.
We're really kicking these down the field.
Yeah, we kind of need to, unfortunately.
All
We're
right.
actually gonna talk. We're actually gonna talk about them before Crossblades.
Okay.
This is the order.
Okay.
All right. So, or actually after Crossblades because this makes more sense if we explain Crossblades first. So yeah, Surprise Punishment. So Surprise Punishment. This card is great. It's 9 damage for 3 gauge. It's really hard to do anything about. You probably never play it because it's so the boost and the force is so important. So basically, this card is often an unreactable 9 damage. It is on
Yeah.
curve, hits for 9, costs 3 gauge, all those fun things. That's great. Play it if you feel like it. It's also 2 force. It's also a backflip, aka 2 force and an extra card. So the fact that its backflip is on this card is actually crucial because that's like your main way of maintaining range and cards. I feel like even though this card is bonkers, you probably play it as backflip 80+% of the time, just because
Wow.
the opponent decided to play footsies with you
Just
for once.
just because you need to maintain that range that badly.
Yeah, basically.
Even 9
But
damage is not enough to make you not want to maintain range.
but with that said, if you're at range 2 and the opponent is going to get hit by surprise punishment, and you have 3 gauge and maybe you have the choice to exceed or surprise punishment, I think it's not a bad idea to surprise punishment. I mean, look, you go to range 2, right? 1, 2, 3. So you stay at range 2. You do
Right.
side swap,
Right.
and you hit him, and you chunk him for 9, and that's
A lot.
fine. That's a good amount of damage. They're probably not hitting you back. They
Right.
could ex cross you. Common problem. But if they don't specifically have EX cross, if they block you, you're kind of sad because you did just spend a lot of resources. But
Right.
you're going to change cards or something.
So
But
is her gauge generation dire enough that her ultras and her exceed mode tend to be an either or is this something that conceivably I've exceeded, I've done the game plan, I'm doing my Alice things, and now we're in the mid to late game, and I have 3 gauge again? Or is her economy so tight that really once I'm exceeded, that kind of was my payout?
so if your economy is doing that well that you have a lot of gauge, they're going to run out of life before you run out of gauge.
Okay,
Like
it's
your
it's
payout will kill them. At which point, who cares?
it's like that.
But
It's that kind of problem that they'll die before I get that gauge again.
yeah, so
Okay,
either you're tight on gauge and you probably have economy problems and you're like probably have damage problems, or you like hit a bunch and like I mean maybe they armored a bunch of attacks somehow, but you're not Juno. You beat armor by just chewing through it and smashing them for 7
right.
plus
You
repeatedly.
you just hit really hard all the time. Okay,
So yeah, your economy is like your economy does have issues. You might end up playing Normal's Woman, for a little bit just to throw cards. Normal's Woman with +2 power on certain sweeps and spikes is not the end of the world. So yeah, I mean, you surprise punishment is a card that you can play. It's not even again. It's kind of like Baptism. It's not bad. It's not one of the big exclamation point shows up and then the opponent explodes. Even though it does happen to hit for 9.
right,
So
right.
they explode, but they explode a little less than your other cards.
It says something about the scale of power that we're talking about here, that this is not the entire game plan. And backflip is just, I need to
Backflip,
stay at range 3 and range 2 too much.
yeah, backflip is exceptional. You're probably gonna play it a lot because it's good value. If you don't feel like setting up surprise punishment, Even though, again, like surprise punishment is actually really easy to set up. If you hit with sword and cross, or you hit with a range 3 soul gazer, which are both trivial to do, you can surprise punishment then next turn.
Right.
And to be clear, sword and cross into surprise punishment, if they have 12 life and you have 2 gauge, they might just be dead.
They just explode, right?
If they have 15 life and you have 1 gauge and you have 2 sword and crosses in hand, they might just be dead. Because you just sword and cross, advantage, sword and cross,
and
advantage,
then
surprise punishment.
Right. So it when we're talking about a late game play, sometimes late game is half your life in Red
Yeah,
Horizon. So it's playable, but it's not, as you said, it's not the game plan. It's a surprise
yeah.
punishment.
It just happens to mostly kill them instead of
Right.
killing them.
Okay.
So yeah, again, this is this is going to sound a little absurd for people familiar with modern Exceed, because this is just not a thing that happens that much anymore. Similar ultras like Turnaluces, even in season 2, and like I don't even know what the closest. I mean, you have like Heavenly Potemkin Buster, but that's a much larger commitment that has much less reliability.
Right.
I feel like the most comparable modern Exceed is like Gold Lewis's EX down with the system for 4 gauge, and that only hits for 8,
Yeah.
even though it is above curve, or
Yeah.
Eno's 5 gauge, or like some season 3 big ultras. Like, if you look at Ken Shoryu, for example, EX Shoryu, or sorry, the Ultra Shoryu,
Yeah.
but even those, they usually have a way out on the normals, and this is block or die, basically.
Right. Yeah. You have EX cross, you block it, or that's it. End of counterplay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Crossblades. All right. So Crossblades is very similar to Surprise Punishment in that it's a kind of a gauge payout. It's much slower. It does have an auto dodge that you don't have to be exceeded for. So if you just need the auto dodge right now because you have like that hard read on the opponent, then it's pretty scary. This ultra is usually too expensive to play unless you know it's going to hit. Like if we all know that good old reading in the
Sure.
game. And so if you happen to land it because you hit them with the reading, which is honestly the main way you land it, then they take 15 damage, and that is a lot is a lot of damage.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's arguably too many damage, Andarel.
as mentioned earlier, Sword and Cross into Sword and Cross bumps the like 15 lethal range to 21. Because it's 15 plus 3 plus 3.
Uh-huh.
So if they're at 21 life or less and you have 2 gauge, which seems pretty doable, they might just be dead.
Right. So
Uh,
is this in the same boat as surprise punishment though, where because it's kind of an either or with your exceed mode, you probably aren't going to be doing it?
Kinda. So again, your exceed mode is nice. If you rush it, you're certainly playing a reasonable strategy. The only reason to not rush your exceed mode is because you're getting a guaranteed ultra payout, right?
Okay.
And that surprise punishment is a guaranteed ultra payout, but honestly, 9 damage might not actually be better than your exceed, given that you're giving up backflip in the process.
Okay.
And you have ways of dealing damage. 15 damage is a harder sell, but this card's a little less reliable. And Try Me If You Dare is kind of like backflip deluxe, right? So it's 1 force plus your ultra, move up to 4. The opponent chooses either you strike or you draw 3. This is usually you draw 3, which is insane. But sometimes they're feeling really brave.
I mean,
Sometimes they are
like
incredibly brave.
if you're in exceed mode, honestly, even if you're not in exceed mode, you're dominant at these ranges. But if you're in exceed mode and they say, okay, yeah, you move to range 3, and they're like, yeah, I'll strike into you. They need to, like, that's a gutsy call out. So yeah, they're gonna
Yep.
give the bad economy character some economy instead.
Yeah, usually.
Okay.
So, Try Me If You Dare. It's a scary card. It's worth playing. You toss a normal or something, and then you move to range 3, and they probably let you draw a bunch. But maybe they let you strike. Maybe they feel like they're feeling lucky today.
Right.
This card is less good if they have auto dodges, especially speed dodges, because your strikes become less guaranteed, right? In which case, maybe you go for a different route and you try and land crossblades more. But not that many characters have auto dodges that can cover range 3
Right.
bullet speed, right?
And the number of, I mean, you just play Spike or something, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
you can participate in the mix up even if they have a speed dodge.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
So conceivably you would be playing this instead of your Exceed mode, but probably not.
well, we'll get back to this after
Okay.
we talk about her remaining two cards that we haven't talked about.
Okay.
So, Alice, as a character, was designed to be really strong, right? Like her very high power, high impact cards. This also meant that she kind of has some like sub themes that got developed over the course of the game.
Okay.
And one of the sub themes that has never been really done much because the characters, whenever it gets made, people get really salty all the time, is hand control. So Alice has two remaining cards, which are both extremely powerful, that have two of the most absurd, never to be reprinted again in the game boosts. So Soul Eye Divine is stupid, to put it lightly. It is you name a card, the opponent reveals their hand, then they discard all copies of the named card, then you strike with a card of your choice.
You just go over here really quick
Oh
and
no 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 no.
talk about
Yeah yeah.
parry.
So this is Parry Deluxe.
It's like double. It's parry strike, but it's every copy of the card.
Yeah, and so then you got its big sister, which is Reading Deluxe. Which
Yeah.
if that triggers some like what is going on with this card alerts, then
Oh no.
yeah.
So
So
reading works on normals. Soul Eye Diabolic works on everything.
on everything,
Oh
and
no.
we'll get back to that. So Soul Eye Divine is really Dark Corruption is really good, right? It's on curve, it does 4 damage, ignores armors, blah blah blah. It's fine. You play this card when you want to hit for 4 ignore armor. If you've got fierce or something, like you just kill them. If you got plus 8
Right.
to run range, you kill them. Like who cares? This card is good. Just play it sometimes and make them sad.
Right.
If you have plus 2 power, this card is absurd. Into like everything except for sweep. And what are they going to do? Like throw sweep into the chance of exploding due to Sword and Cross or Soul Gazer or Surprise Punishment. But Soul Eye Divine is basically, remember how I said earlier, like you're worried about specific answers a lot of the time?
Yeah.
This is I want to do a thing and make sure that you don't have the card in your hand, right? If you discard a card, great. If you discard 2 cards, even better. If you discard 0 cards, you're still striking, seeing what's in their hand. That's what Power of the Eye, I think it's called
Yeah,
in
on
on
Noel.
Noel.
And
And there's
you have advantage from these incredibly above curve things that just gave you advantage. And now you play one of your readings.
yeah. So
Ugh.
this card is insane. This boost is insane. This card is just very good. This is especially notable because of the fact that, as mentioned, she has a lot of mini combos and ways to just like delete things. So setting up for something, knowing their hand, like maybe they wild swing, but you're a character who punishes wild swings just by having cards that require specific answers, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, this boost is nuts. And this is one of the reasons that I said that your ultras, if you're trying to guarantee it, you guarantee it basically by just deleting their answers. And Soul Eye Divine is a great way to do that. You don't have any discard other than this, really, but you sure do have this.
Yeah, but I mean, but targeted discard with a now Strike Rider on top of it. If you don't get the cards, you maybe just don't play Crossblades. I mean, well then you see what's in their hand, so you do know.
Yeah,
anyway.
you know what's in their hand, or what's in their hand or the Wild Swing, and you can see all their cards, right? Like you Wild Swing. If you don't know their hand, then it's hand plus deck or their options. If you know their hand, then it's just the remaining options, which is still a bit of a hit or miss. But like, what's gonna beat Sword and Cross?
Right. And then
Like this card just tends to not lose.
And again, now you've gained advantage and you have hand information and you have 4 copies of reading in your kit, some of which can hit specials and ultras. Like you probably, by playing this, you probably just win at least one combat, probably more for free.
Yep.
That's really,
and that's why you probably don't
up.
play Dark Corruption that much, unless it kills. And if it kills, just play Dark Corruption.
Sure. Okay. You don't need to do anything fancy. When you were talking about the, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'll ask my question.
I was gonna say, like we've seen Bad Moon. This card is like, it's almost as good as Bad Moon, a little worse. That makes it just extremely good.
Right. But what if instead of Lush Shaker being your source of power was every other card pretty much in your kit and your character ability and your normals, and instead of Lush Shaker you had Ultra Parry?
Yeah, basically.
That's messed up. That's too scary.
Well, So what was your question?
Oh, so you mentioned that she has a couple of these like sort of go-to combos that she's using pretty
Mhm.
regularly. Is this something that we've already talked about, sort of like Sword and Cross being your combo extender, Soul Gazer sort of being your combo starter? Is this the kind of stuff that you're talking about?
Yes, and let's actually jump to Guardian Slasher because that's the card that really does all this thing.
Oh, okay.
So, okay, I'm going to talk about Guardian Slasher last, but there's a little bit of a couple of context things here because this card it's not immediately necessarily obvious why this card is so insane. I mean, this card is insane. It is obvious most of the reasons why this card is insane, but it only gets worse the more you look at it. So, the first thing you need to know about Guardian Slasher is that in Exceed, there's a lot of mechanics that people just kind of take for granted, right? Especially people who've played older, who come from older Exceed sets, especially pre-season 6. What are like the things that you know in Exceed, right? If you have a bunch of normals, reveals, change cards, that's just a common thing people just have internalized because
Right.
reading is so scary.
Right.
If you want to like manage gauge, you Exceed, you play your ultras at the right time. You like have this choice between gauge and like you have to choose how you spend your gauge. You have to choose like sort of how you spend your resources.
Right.
This card throws all of that in the trash. This card just all the things that you know about how to play good Exceed, just throw all that out. It just stops existing. So we'll get back to Guardian Slasher. Let's talk about Eye Diabolic for a second.
Okay.
So, all right, what are the rules for playing ultras in Exceed?
The rules for playing ultras in Exceed. You mean in terms of when it is a good idea to do them?
No, no, no. Mechanically, how do you play an
Oh,
ultra?
so you strike from hand, you put your card down on reveal, you validate from gauge. Gauge goes to
Okay,
discard. We've both flipped, and then you just run your the flow chart. You do before effects, you do
sure.
hit effects, all that stuff.
What what are the other rules for playing an ultra?
If
You know this, but it sounds silly.
if you are you talking about like you can invalidate them?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So if you play an ultra that's not from hand, you you can choose to invalidate it because
Right.
the concept there is you should never be forced to play an ultra
Right.
because because
If you have 4 gauge and I'm Ryu and I just wild swung a Metsushoryu, the punishment is that I lost Metsushoryu. It's not that I lost Metsushoryu and then 4 gauge because I had to play it.
yeah. So if you the like golden rule of ultras is that ultras are expensive. They are a commitment. If you play an ultra, you are choosing to spend the gauge. You must spend the gauge. Like there go those resources.
Okay.
Soul Eye Diabolic breaks that rule. Soul Eye Diabolic is the only card in the game that can force the opponent to play an ultra from hand and validate it.
Oh God. That's
There are characters in the game who literally cannot play the game if Soul Eye Diabolic is a threat because their economy is tight enough. Consider Tager, right? Consider anyone with a 4 gauge, a 3 or 4 cost ultra.
oh my
They
God.
cannot
Yeah.
ever have that ultra in hand because you can usually trivially beat it just if you know what's happening.
I mean, if
And
it has even slightly, like if it's not like a 1 to 4, 1 to 3 ultra, like Tager's like, okay, cool, you're at 5 gauge but not 6 gauge. You can't hit me with this particular attack. Now you lost it and you lost all your gauge.
yeah,
Oh my God.
also like eat sword and cross nerd. You
Yeah, yeah.
know,
Oh, also I have an
like
attack. I have an attack
how
too.
many
It's
yeah
not just it's
how
not
many
just it's not just all of the resources you lost.
yeah, two words. Also, you lost 3 gauge, you lost 2 force, you took 3 damage. The number of ultras in the game that can beat Sword and Cross is actually quite low,
Yeah.
especially if you're exceeded. Uh, and also you do happen to have a card that reveals their hand. Don't forget.
Yeah, and the ability to gain advantage pretty easily, so you can combo these things together. So that's actually like good card, pretty good card, good boost, good boost. This is the first and really scary character ability. These are the things that you have described that have made me like viscerally in my gut go like that's not fair. Like
Yeah.
that's not allowed.
So Guardian Slasher, if you ask around, especially for people who've played long enough to like really remember when Alice was in tournament play or playable,
Right.
and I mean I think we got her banned pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Guardian Slasher is probably the best card ever printed. Will probably be the best card ever printed, like attack plus boost.
Right.
And if any card is ever printed that is nearly as good as Guardian Slasher, like please inform the creator that something has gone horribly
Yeah,
wrong.
like something like they've it's broken containment, right? Like it's out in the wild.
I mean,
So
like people, you will get that feeling sometimes on cards that are like kit defining. Again, like Bad Moon is a terrifying card. Bad Moon is extremely good.
right,
Bad Moon plus Lust Shaker. That's one of the few cards I can think of where I feel like, oh god, I have to play around this, and like I might just die.
right, and the rest of the kit has been balanced kind of accordingly around that really scary threat.
Yeah, exactly. You know, Bad Moon is your only source of power
Right,
on Lust Shaker, and like
right,
it only works on offense. It's really good, but it's not absurd.
right. We
So
haven't.
yeah, Soul Diabolic.
I'm sorry. Go ahead,
I,
Andarel.
so I've played up the fact that it can call ultras, right? That is the broken thing about it. It can also
Right,
call specials, which means if she chooses to not play Guardian Slasher, which again is a choice, then you basically get a guaranteed reading multiple times per game on top of reading. Like
right.
this is if you play both Soul Diabolics, you have 8 readings per deck, 4 of which can hit any card. There's not a lot you can do about that.
Yeah, no. I mean, games are decided on less than that many strikes. If I cleanly win that many strikes on a character who can pump out damage like this character, I just won.
Yeah, and of course, you know, this is a character whose sweeps can hit for 8, whose spikes can hit for 7.
Right.
You sort of have incidental damage where you need to, especially if you can make range 3. If the opponent is in a situation like this, for example, which looks really good, if they have a cross or cross-like in their hand, they might just be dead. You know, because that is 7 or 8 damage. It's because they retreat into the corner and you hit back with a
And
spike or
and
a
you
sweep.
and you hit them back, right?
And then if they can't move back in immediately or deal with the threat of like Soul Gazer or Bloody Baptism here, that could easily be 14, 13 damage,
Okay.
just in a 12 to 13 damage in a burst.
And so basically, like the combo starter is not Soul Gazer or Sword and Cross; it's Soul Eye. I'm
It's one
doing
of the Soul Eyes,
I'm
yeah.
doing something to make them play a card they wouldn't normally play, like reading, and then I'm getting advantage with my combo cards, and then not letting go. Maybe reading them a couple more times in there because I have hand information or something, and just like hammering them with damage when I get them in a bad position because I force them into a bad position. Is that right?
So yeah, so if you are exceeded, right, or if they don't have sweep, and or like a sweep like that discards cards,
Right.
lethal damage basically looks like 2 copies of Sword and Cross, 1 copy of Guardian Slasher, and 1 copy of Crossblades.
Right.
Because that's 3 plus 3 plus 15.
Yeah.
At the cost of 2 gauge and 4 cards, like 4 specific cards in hand, which are you can substitute a Soul Gazer for Sword and Cross somewhere if you want. Um, you know, you can also substitute the Soul Gazer on defense. You know, if you're at range 2 and they choose to strike into you, you start the
Right.
combo.
You back up and then do your combo that way instead. Okay.
You can also what are some other silly things you can do? If they have like slow movement or something, you can throw assault type stuff. Like you can gain advantage and then they move, which
Right.
happens sometimes.
Sure.
The other thing with Sword and Cross, that Sword and Cross is so flexible that, for example, if you assault into a Tatsu, you gain advantage, then they Tatsu, then Sword and Cross, like you strike with the advantage. Sword and Cross lets you then go to 3 and continue the combo. That's fine.
That's incredibly messed up. So
Like
so so
it's not about little. It's basically not about just trying to like make a big attack with a lot of boosts. It's basically you have 3 sources of advantage, right? You've got these 2, and you've got assault.
right.
You've got 2 sources of reading, and you've got Soul Eye Divine. Your
Right.
enders are Crossblades, maybe the other copy of Guardian Slasher, or Surprise Punishment.
Okay. So and
And
we kind of glossed over Guardian Slasher the card itself, but this is just a finisher.
sort of. All right, so Guardian Slasher. So first things first, this is a 357, 356.
Right.
That's pretty good, right? That's lies. It's actually 376.
That's better.
And then it's got 2 power if they have more cards in hand than you. When does the opponent usually have more cards in hand with you? When you're spending a bunch of boosting cards to do a combo, right?
Oh, sure. Okay, so you notice that they had an equal number of cards in hand to you, or maybe one more, and you're like, sick,
Yeah,
advantage, 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 Guardian Slasher.
Yeah, like play a reading or play a Soul Eye Divine or play a Soul Eye Diabolic to burn 2 cards at once, so you dip below their hand size, and then
Oh,
you're hitting for 9, like 3, 9, 6 on a special with minimal commitment.
right. Okay. And the only reason that I'm not doing that all the time is that Diabolic itself such a such a combo
Yeah,
starter.
yeah, you don't have to play Guardian Slasher. It is just a 3, 7, 6 or 3, 9, 6 at with
Right.
minimal investment.
Right, right. As
With
though
like the best with probably actually the best boost in the game. I
yeah,
think I do not think a boost will ever be better than Soul Eye Diabolic.
for the health of the game I hope so. So, okay. So that's the game plan. I exceed, I build a my opponent is trying to keep out of range 3. I have enough ways that I can say no, actually combat is happening right now and and I've set up a situation where you can't really do anything.
Yep. I mean, most like you can pop try me if you dare. You can move. You can backflip. Like you're trying to basically you're basically trying to move around and force the opponent to be in a situation where they let you strike at a good range for you, or they strike into a range, or they strike you at a range that's good for you. 'Cause the opponent can't actually run away forever.
Right.
Because if they do, what happens when you run away forever, right? You burn a lot of cards in the process.
Right.
You burn a lot of cards in the process. Now your hand is revealed. Your deck becomes minimal. You can't even mill normals because Soul Eye Diabolic hits specials and ultras. Maybe you got some gauge, and then you just like you get red and you explode.
Okay.
So that angle just doesn't work. Resource draining Alice is fine. Like deck draining Alice is a losing proposition because of Soul Eye
Right,
Diabolic.
cuz she will hit you once and it'll be over.
Yeah, like you can parry this if you want, but parrying doesn't move or strike or like move or boost. So if you're parrying this, great. I really hope you hit because if you whiff a parry on this and let her strike into you, you're gonna have a bad time.
Right.
And also, you kind of need the blocks to deal with these two.
To deal with her big combo ender payouts. Okay. So like that's that's the game plan. That's the kit. Is I'm using my really good attacks to maintain a combo or to call people out or to set up a situation. I'm using my crazy boosts. Possibly I'm using Guardian Slasher as a finisher. Possibly I'm using these as a finisher. And I just combo them to death.
Yep, yeah. These are like your resource extenders and your repositioners. They're also your finishers. This card does everything. This is like kind of a backup plan.
Right.
Backup plan. Combo extender plus super safe. Combo extender plus super safe.
Okay.
And like we talk about all of this, and this is all fine and good, but like don't forget that her exceed mode makes it really hard to play to like strike against her.
Yeah, that on its own, like just that text on her exceed mode is already like I don't even have to look at some of these cards. That's already really scary. But the combos that you're describing are too much.
The main thing that this exceed mode does in terms of the combo game is that it means that Soul Gazer and Sword and Cross, if you are setting up the combo, especially at 3,
Hmm.
they now dodge sweep because now you're immune to that random discard and guard.
Oh, sure. So because if
That's actually your big problem in normal mode.
right, yeah. So you actually are keeping, if they do happen to sweep you and you are maintaining a hand of things that includes one of your finishers or one of your sort of combo extenders, and then they get rid of that. Now
Yeah, you're sad.
you actually are legitimately in trouble then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
What?
so yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
that's. I was gonna say, so that's like your main issue. And I'll ask your question because I feel like it's related.
I mean, I was going to move on to just like, so like that's kind of her game plan. Are her normals kind of just used as normal, but just amped up, or are they mostly like change cards fodder to get this online?
So it's actually kind of weird, and the reason it ties back into counterplay. So Alice has 2 big weaknesses.
Okay.
Her first weakness is that really 3, but 2 of them are related. Her first weakness is that her economy is extremely limited. I mean, she's got draw a card, and then draw 3 cards if they
If they let you,
if
right.
they choose to.
Right.
So if your hand size is pathetic, then this probably doesn't draw you the cards. I mean, if you have 1 card in hand, like maybe they're like, yeah, strike. What are you gonna do? Wild swing?
Right.
So this card works best if you already have like a decent hand. So change cards, yeah, and you might like literally just change cards this instead of doing that because if you don't really need the movement, if you're only going to move like 1, as nice as move 1 and strike is,
Right.
move 1 and like burning your hand for that is kind of rough.
Yeah, and this is 3/4. You could be doing better than move 1 and strike probably.
if they let you, right? If
Right.
they're really scared of move one and strike, then they'll just give you the cards.
Yeah, true.
But your other big weakness is that your range one game is basically just Soul Gazer.
Okay.
So you're really reliant on normals at range one. This is the boost.
Yep.
This might be a boost or might be an attack if you want to do an advantage chain, depending on what their cards are.
Okay.
Because remember, like you can hit with assault and then read something that moves, and be careful that way. This might be an anti-slow, but you already have a bunch of anti-slows, so it's probably tech. There are boosts that are a problem,
Yeah.
especially plus a lot of speed or plus
Yeah.
a bunch of guard.
Swift destruction we already mentioned. If you don't have the things that if you don't have the Soul Gazer that would actually let you deal with some of those things,
Yeah,
that's relevant.
you also don't really like things like defend, especially when you're not exceeded, because they can like put guard on their advancing stuff, and you're not actually hitting that hard.
Right.
That taxes your sword and crosses, which again, like first world problems. But if a lot of characters have trouble with defend assault, and you basically just do this,
Sure.
right? Then they do that and miss, and you murder them.
And you're still at
But
range 3 and you have advantage.
yeah, but it's still a little annoying, I
Right.
guess. You don't hit them for any damage. Their defend has 1 armor and 3 guard, so you hit them for. If you do this, you don't get to hit for 3
Right.
because it's a passive. So then +2 speed and sweep, both nice. Again, you're weak at range 1, so sweep is a good threat to have. Sweep is also notable because it does chunk people, and you're very good at finishing games. So just even if you both trade for 6, that is usually a win for Alice.
You probably, because they can't kill you from 21 health.
Yeah, exactly. You
Right.
got a gauge. You brought them closer to kill range, and then when they're in kill range, they're dead.
Right.
+2 speed is relevant, especially on normals. It is not. None of your cards really benefit that much from +2 speed, which is a weird thing to say.
Yeah, they're already like so fast, or it doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah, the fact that they're all on curve or 1 speed, on or above curve or 1 speed, means that you're only really caring if they have an eye specifically, right? Because
Right.
that'll outspeed Sword and Cross.
Right. Which
+2 speed on Soul Gazer is pointless.
right.
+2 speed on Bloody Baptism is not terrible, especially at range 1, like 2 in particular, but it's not great. And Dark Corruption again, pointless. Not pointless, but not great. Guardian Slasher pretty much pointless.
Right.
This card is not concerned about speed.
It is potentially relevant, but mostly because like the era. I mean, when you mentioned eyes, like the era that this game was in at the time, stat lines did look a little bit different. It was even among like Fatal Eye, like that kind of stuff. Soul Gazer is crazy. I think even by maybe those standards, but
Most of those have 7.
It was
has 8.
possible to have something that you would need speed on Alice to stay on top of. So light still has a place.
Yeah, I mean nowadays, what are the 8 speeds right now? So Chip's got a 9, Gold Lewis has an 8. Theoretically, it's kind of hard to set up.
Right. There's really not too many.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, I'm trying to think of nothing else in season 7 that I can think of. Season 6, Byakuya's got an 8.
Yep.
That card's actually a problem for Alice, so you might want to outspeed that, which it feels bad for Byakuya, to be honest.
Oh yeah.
If Caught You gets outsped, you're like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, what was that?
Then there are a couple speed dodges. I think there's like 4 characters have speed dodges. You care about those, but again, +2 speed won't beat that.
Right.
You've got season 5. Are there any 8s in season 5? 9 has a 9, right?
Yeah, Bang has one too. Bang's got a really fast card.
Yeah, so there's like situational reasons, but it's not your priority.
Right.
And again, like you're a character with 8 readings, read, sweep, just do it.
Yeah, just hit them hard.
You kill them by reading and hitting them with sweep 5 times or 4 times plus another 6er, right? Like
right.
That's enough. You don't need to ask for more. Four times if they're at range 3.
Right. Yeah, that's no problem.
It's basically a payout card.
Okay.
And also, because of Eye Diabolic, it's a lot easier to find cards with poor range that happen to get swept, even at range 2.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. I mean, as though sweep needs any help being more consistent, but you have readings to set it up. And also, as you mentioned, she does have kind of a range 1 weakness. Sweep is great at range 1.
Yeah, like literally, if the opponent has an ultra that hits at not range 1 and you diabolic that ultra and hit them with sweep, there was decent odds they just kind of pack up and walk
They
away
lost the
sadly.
game. Yeah, they just scoop.
That's that's crushing.
Yeah.
Spike, same kind of problem. Defend is fine, I guess. Like, what needs armor and guard? I certainly none of your normal cards do.
Right.
None of your specials and ultras do. And Spike itself is good, but you already can clean house anyways.
Right.
But you have a bunch of,
maybe this is force then.
or you read block, right, and then you
Yep.
spike them.
Sure. Yeah, that's true.
Or a block like you have plenty of options to read it or to hit with it. The fact it doesn't hit at range 1's a problem, so it's probably forced to move or change cards. Focus, reading copies 5 through 8, and good card overall.
Yep.
Play it or boost it. Never
Yep.
going to complain.
Yep.
Block. You don't actually have that much economy, so parry is pretty bad for you. You don't want to be parrying, or sorry, blocking. Like, you don't want to be just playing blocked for the defense.
Right.
If you got to, you got to. And your wild swings are pretty bad. They at range 2 to 3, your wild swings are generally mediocre, except when they win you the game on the spot, which is not the worst problem to have, but it's not great.
Yeah, you probably can do better than a 50-50 or less than a 50-50.
But again, like, you would have poor economy, so defending with a wild swing is a real concern. And if you're at range 1, you don't really want a wild swing because you might wild swing, a critical card.
Right.
So that's a rough spot to be in. That is remember when I said that the weaknesses kind of tie together? That's the other big one. Is those all glue together into, like, the way to beat Alice is you rush her down and you pressure her, or you keep her at very long range consistently. She struggles with both of those.
Okay.
If you ever mess up, you are probably dead. So, and if you don't play around Eye Diabolic appropriately, which is almost impossible to play around, and you don't, like, kill her before she gets enough gauge and positioning, that's what it is. Like, the thing about Alice that makes her so scary is she hits like a truck. She can play a very, very hard to react to game plan. She has, like, glaring weaknesses, but if she has the advantage, if she has, like, a reasonable pressure situation, most, if not every character will just immediately crumple in the face of her offense.
Okay. So,
and that's pretty good.
You mentioned, and it sounds like sort of the strategic considerations. Like, we're moving on to counterplay here, which means that we're probably pretty close to wrapping the lesson up. You mentioned nearer to the beginning of the lesson, Andarel, that there are a couple characters who maybe don't, like, do well into Alice, but they do okay. What kind of character should we be looking for? Like if things have gone very, very wrong in the universe, and you find yourself up against an Alice in tournament, what is your team that you are trying to deal with her with? What kind of character would it be?
That's hard. So you want someone who's very consistent.
Okay.
You want someone who can control range well. So, like, the Ryus of the world can, like, constantly just move in on her, basically.
Right.
That's nice. You want someone who's not super gauge dependent, because you might just not have any gauge to work with. So Ryu is sad, but Ryu, like, can play at 2 gauge consistently, if that makes sense. Like, just boost your ultras
and just crit a lot, right? And just kind of maintain that slightly below threshold, so you can at least still invalidate your ultras.
Exactly. You want relatively flexible range bands, and so, like, easy resources, and ability to play a kind of non-gauge dependent game, so probably not exceed mode dependent, because if you are trying to exceed, then at that point you're also vulnerable to
ultras,
Diabolic at, like, around the same time.
Right, sure.
So probably not any season 5 character, to be quite honest.
Okay.
Season 7, I think a little more flexible. You're just kind of in a better spot overall. It's really hard to pick any specific characters. The main things are, you need to be able to stay at close range. You need to be able to threaten options that beat Soul Gazers. So you need to have good slows, and especially slows that move you. And you need to be able to play without much gauge.
Okay, and you need to basically be then, like, ready to go when you're unpacked, right? Like any character who has to build to something is going to have a problem. The character that could beat Alice would need to start the game already in a strong state. They can't really be can't really be a build up character,
or turn on with, like, a gauge.
Okay, so actually, maybe like some of the season 7, like people who are doing lots and lots of cancel shenanigans, they may have some things that can actually maintain
Yeah,
pressure
I
well
mean,
with Alice.
I haven't tested too much. I mean, Soul could theoretically work. He's got decent guardy attacks. He's kind of flexible on gauge. He's got Tyrant Rave as a fast option to threaten
Right,
Sword and Cross, and he's
right.
got Fafnir also, which is pretty good. Even if I think Fafnir closes 3, right?
Are you talking about Fafnir or Night Raid?
Oh, sorry, not faster. Night Raid Vortex closes
Yeah,
3, right?
Night Raid is a closes 3. Yeah,
So Sword and Cross still beats Night Raid, but Soul Gazer doesn't.
right,
I mean, Sword and Cross beats unless you close 7. Sword and Cross wins, right? So
right. Yeah,
that's not really a consideration unless you're literally Ulrich. But it's there's just not there's a lot of things that you need that get you there, and you need to be able to deal with her exceed mode because that's going to happen. And
right.
so characters like Soul, if they can close in a lot and have a lot of like, I think he has boosts that get him before movement and a bunch of like random before movement. That all helps. You need to be able to move. If you're the kind of character who basically sits down and chucks projectiles,
Yeah,
she exceeds you, you lose. It's
it's
over.
over. Right. Okay.
It's just done. If you
Okay.
can't get out of range 3, you're not playing the game anymore.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, unless you have action compression to the point where you can move strike every turn or almost every turn, like Cyrus can kind of do that, but that's very taxing on his resources.
Right. And her resources are a little bit shaky, but if your resources are kind of shaky too, that's less of a problem for her, and that means she just beats you in card quality.
Yeah. So we'll do another lesson at some point about Juno, who is the other band like character from that era.
Yeah.
And Juno has kind of the opposite thing. Juno is like super flexible. She hits kind of weakly until she exceeds, in which case she's a monster truck.
Right.
And like has all this weird toolbox E kit, but is also insanely fast and hard to deal with. I think the actual opposite, and the character who really does all these things that we talked about earlier, is Carmine.
Sure.
Carmine actually does pretty well into Alice because what are the things that we need, right? He's not very gauge reliant. He is slow and guardy. He has ways to break his ranges, so he can break the range
Yep.
dodge because he has stuff that like strikes from dissolves.
He can move like crazy.
He can move like crazy. He can hit above curve.
Okay.
That was the thing. Like one of the reasons, and again, I'm not going to speak for the Level 99 server or some of the folks there, but one of the big reasons that Carmine was on the radar for banning was that he actually does do pretty well into Alice.
Right.
We've seen him beat Alice, and like beating Alice is not the end of the world. People can see it as a reasonably balanced game. People can beat Alice,
Sure.
but it's hard. You are not on the front foot there, right?
Right. Yeah. And you can get deck comped, you can get lucky gamed, but having a character who is able to be a tournament viable threat into a meta where Alice exists.
Yeah, I mean,
is tough.
if these 3 are on the bottom of your deck, then we're talking, right?
Right.
If these 3 cards are not a threat at the right time, or if so, I mean, one of the issues that you run into with Alice a lot, your crosses, if you try and get out of a mix-up by striking with cross, you can be in a very bad situation.
Sure, because now you've depositioned yourself, similar to Bloody Baptism, right? Like you've got yourself into a situation that you can't easily get back to.
Yeah, but even worse because run is on cross.
Sure, run is there, right? And you don't care
So
quite as much about Hunter's Instinct, sure.
yeah, so you have like serious problems with the corner. I mean, I one of my very first Exceed games was against Brad. We played Alice vs Juno, and I struck out of a really good, really dangerous strike with EX Cross and won the strike clean, and then like just got rushed down and died.
Right.
And that is the way you lose as Alice. Basically, you overcommit to something. Your economy kind of gets a little bit shaky. You get stuck at range 1. Like maybe you are stuck doing Try Me If You Dare, and then they make you strike, and you like don't really have a great follow up because you just played this to move.
Right.
And again, like spending 2 to move past them. You're like range 1 and your economy are your weakness. You're hoping to make do with that by like the power of basically Soul Eye Diabolic and the fact that you can delete them.
Right, and clearly you can, because there's a reason that Alice has been banned for all these years.
Yeah, no, and also as games have gotten more fair and interactive, the like particular brand of dumb play that Alice is good at just has gotten stronger, I feel, in some ways, because
right. There's well, I mean, like, why would you? She's banned. There's no need to be prepared for this kind. Like no one is being balanced around getting Diabolic, because why would they? Because that's never going to get printed again.
Yeah, I mean, the closest that we get to this is Anji, right? Like Anji kind of has weaker versions of these boosts on his
Right.
ultras, if I recall
Right.
correctly.
Yeah.
He's got like literally breeding on one ultra, and what's the other one do?
Oh, on his big card draw ultra. I don't even remember. I always just play as an attack. Let me
I'm
find
pretty
it.
sure. Yeah, it's the one that looks at the top card of their deck and then goes to
Oh,
gauge.
totally. Yeah, I can see
So
the
you know, Anji
commonality
kind of
there.
has that like sub theme, but those are both substantially worse than the Soul Eyes.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. All right.
So yep, that's Alice. You know, as mentioned, she's banned. You can play her if you want. She is actually pretty fun to play. She's not, unless you're getting rushed down at range one and immediately exploding, which is a problem that you have if you misplay her. So don't necessarily give her to a new player and expect her to shine immediately.
Sure. Yeah.
Uh, I'll,
Exceed is not really that kind of game. She has tech. You need to figure out why these are crazy. You need to watch his guide, for example.
I mean, if you want a character like that, I mean, give him Marathi or something. Those characters can be pretty self-evidently silly.
Right. Yeah. You just
But
kind of let them play themselves at that point. Sure.
yeah, her skill curve really shines once you sort of get the feeling of how Exceed works, because she does tend to break a lot of the systems around the edges,
Yeah.
and you know she breaks speed in annoying ways. She breaks hand management. She honestly breaks like the power and life metrics in annoying ways, because the like oops I'm dead is usually not that much of a factor, and with most of the cast that's the thing you can play around.
Right. But
They need to like
you can't play around dying from 21.
yeah, and the fact that Crossblades is slow makes it even more dangerous, because you can play a card that forces them to reposition into it with Diabolic.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. So you just they wind up at 3 mid strike and now you're already hitting them.
Yeah, and like that's not as much of a concern with the normals, but it's definitely a concern with a lot of specials and ultras. And
Sure.
you know, having the list of anything to pick is is a pretty nice list.
Yeah, you look at their kit and you say, "All right, that one is the one I will kill you with this time."
Yeah,
Okay.
basically.
In this particular position. That's really really bad. All right. Well, Andarel, is there anything else you wanted to mention about Alice?
Yeah, so one thing, or actually a couple of really quick things. So
Sure, of course.
Alice is a really cool character if you do like that little mini combo game. There are other characters that kind of can play a similar strategy, but obviously nowhere near as scary.
Yeah.
If you like Alice, I recommend some characters to try. So Propeller Knight is designed as kind of he plays a lot of that sort of micro positioning mini game. He is much more mobile than Alice. He has Ulrich stable to him.
Right.
And also, but he does have that sort of like tipper specific range thing.
Right.
Mole Knight can also play kind of that mini combo game. You've got Cammy actually is quite good at that. And then in other seasons, Carl Clover can do a little bit of that. You know, stay tuned for some other lessons there. I think
Yep.
that's being planned.
Yep.
Noelle can kind of do that combo game with her Exceed mode. It is in some ways more flexible, but Noelle does have a lot of those. You know, choose your strikes, you have a little bit of hand pools. Lychee, similarly, new like kind of can do that, but new mostly just focus on keeping you out.
Right.
In season 7, Testament, though obviously Alice, you know, Testament has like the range bands, but is more of a mix up and specific character. Alice just kind of ignores all that and
Alice
chooses to murder you.
just wins at you, right?
Yeah, like Testament is sort of playing this like somewhat nuanced, careful game. Alice just chose violence that day. You've got Gold Lewis again, kind of a slower, more precise character in some ways, which is, you know, his range bands are bigger, but they are limited, and you do get really high reward, but you have to make them hit.
Right. Sure.
Anji's got, you know, you're sort of the slow version again. You've got pretty high values if the cards are working right and you have that information sub theme.
Right.
So those are kind of the things that I like look for as in a similar character. And Anji has way more advantage than you might think. So if you like Alice and you can afford to accept the fact that you're not breaking the speed curve at all times compulsively, you know, you might want to look at Anji. He's
Right.
slow instead of fast, and his ability can seem very silly, but he does fun things there. If you do just want to go fast, I don't know, Chip's a classic for that. Milia's a classic. Milia also is a fun mini combos character with a bunch of advantage access, and
So
you get
so
Bad Moon. That can pretend to be an Alice card.
So if you are a fan of any of those characters and you kind of want to go back and see like why do these characters have the weaknesses that they have, maybe go check out Alice to see like how Exceed has changed over the years. Maybe don't
Yeah,
bring her to tournament. That's not going to work unless outside of very specific, bespoke tournaments. But it would be a good history lesson to learn more about your favorite character, and she's fun.
yeah. Oh yeah, no, she's very fun. She's busted as heck. I think just like thinking of the whole list, I think if I had to boil it down to like four-ish characters, I'd say Milia, Anji, Lychee, and then maybe Carl if you're like really worried about that specific hand management. Um, I think Bang might have a little bit, but not as much. And then Propeller Knight, I think
Propeller
is
Knight,
the again more like reserved kind of. You're trying to play a much more precise game, much more boost reliant, but he's
right,
got some of that feel of trying to like play specific things, and he does actually hit quite hard. His payouts are pretty chunky.
right. Okay, cool. Yeah, so anybody who's interested in those characters and has somehow like they've been out of the game since 2017 and want to get back into it because they used to main Alice, and for some reason they're watching this video, give those characters a look,
Yep, yeah,
or vice
she's
versa.
she's a lot of fun. She is really dumb and like just be careful with your soul eye diabolics. You don't want people to get too mad at you. That card
Yeah,
makes people.
yeah,
That is one of the most self-inducing cards in the game.
yeah. That's actually incredibly messed up. Yeah, so please, as mentioned at the beginning, I was kind of joking, but please, Alice, responsibly. Please do not do this to a player who does not know what they are doing. It's a good way to lose friends. We're all trying to have fun here. But yeah, all right. So, Anderel, thank you so much. This was incredibly informative. I feel like I know enough now to finally be afraid of Alice. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before we wrap it up?
No, I think that's it. Thanks for having me, and hopefully your ongoing season one adventures go well.
Yeah, it's been great so far. I'm looking forward to more of them. All right. Well, thank you so much, Anderel. Folks at home, thank you so much for watching. Hope you learned something as well. I will see you all for the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Have a good one.